SBC Media.
Welcome to iGaming Daily, analysing the news from the betting and gaming industry all over the globe. Supported by SBC Summit Barcelona, the industry-leading conference bringing you the future of sports betting and iGaming.
SBC Summit Barcelona is where you can experience the entire global industry coverage under one roof. Join 10,000 industry professionals for 3 days of game-changing conversation and education. Get your tickets now at sbcevents.com.
Few nations hold a deeper passion for football as the country of Brazil. Therefore, it's little wonder that sponsorship real estate on some of the country's top football clubs is so valuable for betting operators. However, as regulatory framework in the country still lies in limbo, the sponsorship opportunity is something we are going to explore further on today's iGaming Daily podcast. But first, to introduce our panel, let's talk a little bit about football. I'll let you introduce yourselves, and as you do, I just want you to let me know your favourite Brazilian footballer of all time. And I'm conscious this is a hard decision for Fernando and Marcel, natives of South America.
Hi guys, my name is Marcel from all sports events here in Brazil. My favorite football player, Pelé, of course. And I'm a huge Santos fan as well. So Pelé is for me the greatest of all time.
Yeah, I'm Fernando Noodt. I'm a business journalist for SBC Noticias, and it's definitely difficult to choose one football player from Brazil. I mean, so many stars, so many legends have come out of Brazilian football, like Ronaldo Nazario, like the true Ronaldo, like I like to call him, and of course Pelé. You can't ignore Pelé or even Neymar. But yeah, if I had to choose one, I had to choose Pelé, and I'm really sorry, Ronaldo, if you're hearing this, I'm really sorry I had to let you go, but Pelé is Pelé.
See, I'm gonna pick a different name entirely. So I'm George, sponsorship director at SBC Sponsorship. No one's mentioned Ronaldinho, which is crazy. Like, I know Pelé and Ronaldo are huge names, but yeah, just for the joy it gave me during my childhood watching him play, I'm gonna go Ronaldinho.
Yeah, I'll give you that. He's definitely one of the most fun players to watch. Maybe not the best, but you definitely have fun watching him.
Yeah, the goal against Chelsea in the Champions League all them years ago had me mesmerised as a kid. But as a very biased Man United fan, I want to give an honourable shout out to Casemiro, who I've had the privilege of watching this season. Just an absolute Rolls Royce of a footballer, a real, fantastic player. But obviously not up there quite with the likes of Pelé, Ronaldo and Ronaldinho. But to business anyway, lads, to business. And firstly, I think it's important for a bit of context, Fernando, if you could provide us with an oversight on, I mean, it's been going on for so long, the regulatory framework and the limbo of regulation in Brazil. I just was hoping you'd give us, no easy task, but a bit of an oversight on where we're at with that at the moment.
Yeah, sure. For starters, gaming has been banned in Brazil for decades now. Like it's every type of gambling is forbidden in the country. Still, of course, like in the rest of Latin America and every single country without the regulation, gambling still happens, right? People are familiar with the segment. Some might be a little more than others, but people have been gambling for ages with international operators. But since it has been banned, no really big operations have been going on there, at least until a few years ago. After a push from Michel Temer's mandate, he was the president before Jair Bolsonaro, who was the previous president before Lula, right? He passed a provisional measure to regulate sports betting in the country, which needed to have to be it required regulation to be signed within 2 years of its publication. So since it was December 2018, 2 years, it would be December 2020. It had, of course, an extension of 2 extra years. So expectations still were going 2 years after, by December last year. People were expecting Jair Bolsonaro to actually sign the bill or the measure to actually regulate it and regulate effectively regulate the industry. But that didn't happen. So then Then comes in Lula, right? He was recently appointed, elected president last year, started his mandate back in January, and he moved forward with a new provisional measure to regulate the segment, which actually gained momentum. I think by the first few months of the year, we were all looking to Brazil and at Brazil and thinking, oh, it's finally happening. It looked like it was finally happening, but it actually lost that momentum over the last few weeks. On top of that, President of the Chamber of Deputies, Arthur Lira, started pushing to get the measure turned into a proposed bill. So instead of just being like a decree, it would need to go through Congress rather than just get signed off by the executive branch. Additionally, you have a match fixing scandal rocking the football stage, like big issue right now in Brazil. Many layers of the professional football affected by a match fixing scheme, a scandal that has rocked the country, and even up to Serie A, like the first division in Brazil, has been affected by this match fixing scandal, which has even costed some professional players in the first division to get their contracts revoked, right? So that has also turned the government to form a special commission to look into the investigation, looking into that match fixing scandal. So some even say that regulation might be delayed until that group lays out its conclusions so they can take them into consideration for the new regulation, right? But since we are talking sponsorships in this podcast, we can't leave out that there's also another proposed bill that wants to ban all gambling advertising in Brazil, which would be like really harmful for the industry and has generated some concerns amid operators and gaming guilds that have been formed in the last few years. Of course, along all this process, since Temer signed this provisional measure, many companies have been created to operate sports betting in Brazil. So the sports betting landscape has changed a lot. It's a lot of local names operating in Brazil. So things are starting to look good for regulation, but still we are not quite there yet.
Yeah, a lot to dissect there, and we'll definitely come to the match fixing stuff because I think it's such a vital issue. But I know George will tell you in the UK at the moment, when a shirt sponsorship is signed with a betting operator and a big Premier League or Championship club, there's a weird sort of backlash. It's not met with great positivity. Marcel, you're very much ears on the ground in Brazil. How receptive are the general public, and I guess more specifically football fans, to betting operators partnering with clubs and to sports betting in general, I guess?
In Brazil, I think the great deal is with the regulation first, because a lot of people in Brazil still think it's kind of illegal to general public. So how come things are not regulated and you can play and you can gamble? But in general, for sports fans, they really love the gambling companies because, probably 80% of the club sponsorship, what's paying the bills for the club right now, is coming from the sponsors in this industry, So fans are fighting for, okay, you get for example, Santos Blaze sponsorship, you get, 20 million, and everybody's, finally we're going to get some players. And I think general public is not really concerned about the gambling sponsorship, Sports fans are very receptive to it. And it's kind of creating a culture, as Fernando mentioned, ever since it became growing in Brazil. People really started to gamble, and with friends, small groups of friends. It was not a culture here in Brazil to gamble on sports, like it's right now. But at the same time, there's a lot of concern. It's this in the market and with clubs and with fans that, Okay, so if they regulate the gambling industry, so suddenly they will cut the sponsorships and the clubs will break. So this is also a concern for Brazilian sports fans in general.
Yeah, so George, you were just back from, well, not long back from Brazil, right? And I wondered if you had any opinions on how that relationship can, as regulation comes in, how that relationship between sports betting partners and clubs, some of the biggest clubs as well, can stay fresh and stay good, for want of a better word, rather than how we've seen it evolve in many ways in the UK.
Yeah, I think one of the big things out there that I've noticed is that in Brazil at the moment, there's an oversubscription of brands trying to do the deals with teams. Like, it's very, very difficult. Very difficult for brands to get partnerships with clubs just because there's so many brands trying to get hold of them. Now, what that can sometimes lead to, and I'm not saying that this is the case in all instances, but what it can lead to, and certainly speaking to some of the operators out there, is kind of a bit of a laziness on the part of the clubs or the brands themselves on activating those partnerships, because they're so easy to come by. So it makes sense, right? If something's easy to get hold of, then you're not worried about activating it, because if you lose it at the end of the season, there's another handful of brands, maybe 2 handfuls of brands trying to come on board as partners. So I think, as and when we see regulation, naturally we'll probably see less operators in the market because some operators won't become regulated. You might see some market consolidation, and all of that will ultimately lead to a reduction in the demand for these sorts of sponsorship assets. Now that'll mean 2 things. Number one, teams and brands are going to have to work harder to activate them, and number 2, it means that the huge increases in sponsorship values that we've seen, rights fees that are being paid, in which case are absolutely comparable to the Premier League. Now, bear in mind, the Premier League is, there's one broadcast feed for the Premier League, and it's seen globally, whereas sponsoring in the Brazilian market is very much about Brazil. I think we'll start to see those fees reduce.
Okay, I guess it's quite important to lay out, as you mentioned, there's not great coverage of the Brazilian leagues in the in Europe. Fernando, just how significant is the presence of betting operators when it comes to sponsorship, usher, and also just betting partners in Brazil's top 3 leagues?
Well, it's definitely significant. I mean, out of 40 teams, there's 40 teams in Serie A and Serie B, which are the first the top 2 divisions in Brazilian football. And out of those 40 teams, 39 have a sponsorship deal with a gaming company. The only team that doesn't have one is Cuiabá, which is in Serie A. So I guess that's a pretty nice target for companies out there. So you might want to write that down, Cuiabá. But then again, leagues also have sponsorships with or sponsorship deals with gaming companies. Galera Bet is a sponsor for the Serie A, and Betano actually holds the naming rights with the second division, so, which is, instead of being called just Serie B, is called Serie Betano. Right, I think that's pretty smart, personally. But besides the first 2 leagues, the first 2 divisions, there's also a lot of deals with regional teams. Even, I mean, betting operators are definitely looking to land these type of deals, and are looking into the state leagues and the teams competing in lower tiers of football. So they are definitely present in all football across all leagues in Brazil.
And out of curiosity, I know in the UK there are a few clubs that have taken, where they have a chairman that has taken a moral stance against gambling, and that's why they don't have a gambling partner. For the team you mentioned to be the only team in the top 2 tiers not to have a gambling partner, is that a moral stance? Is that do you know?
I'm not sure whether that's a moral stance. I don't think so. I think actually we reported on the team actually looking for a betting partner, because since they don't have one, there's an opportunity there. I think they were actually looking for one. So That would be the exact opposite of being against the industry.
Just to add to that, I think there's two things. Number one, in addition to kind of the teams and the leagues that Fernando mentioned, there's also the state championships that exist in football in Brazil. And, even those competitions now have taken on betting partners. And when it comes to the moral stance, I know it's not the case in all Brazilian teams anymore, but a lot of the Brazilian teams are fan-owned in a similar way to other South American teams. I know there's some private ownership now coming into or has been for a while in Brazilian football, but I don't think you necessarily have the same sort of stances being taken as you do in Europe, just because the ownership models tend to be different in South America.
Cuiabá is a team from Pantanal, near the great agro production in Brazil. They have a lot of money they have a lot of sponsors in agricultural and soy exports. So this is a kind of a different team. Maybe they are a small team in fans, but they want maybe a huge sponsorship because they think they're worth more. That's maybe the case in Cuiabá, just out of curiosity. But as he was mentioning, Fernando, from the leagues, Serie A, Serie B, all these leagues, and there's also Copa do Brasil, which would be like the equivalent to the FA Cup. But Brazil also has state championships. So there's a Paulista, the championship, beginning of the year, the state of São Paulo, the Carioca, the state of Rio, and they also have gambling sponsors, all these leagues. So this is huge. Probably, as I mentioned, 80% of all sponsors right now in football in Brazil are from betting companies. And as George mentioned, and I agree, the teams and leagues don't have to do very much to activate the brand, which is terrible. So if you don't want to sponsor us anymore, there's this huge competition and things are kind of going a little crazy in that sense, It's just a brand for a brand. They don't do much more.
The state championships are a different sponsorship. Forgive my slight ignorance about Brazilian domestic football here, but the state championships are separate sponsorships to the Betano sponsorship of Serie B.
Yes. So you understand, in the Brazilian calendar, the beginning of the year, there's all these state championships, 27 states in Brazil. Each one has its own championship, and each one has its own sponsor. Probably, I think in São Paulo was, I don't know, 1xBet probably. It's Party Match this year. And every state has its own sponsors. This championship doesn't affect the Brasileirão League. It's only a traditional championship that lasts 2-3 months. And then there's the main league, Brazilian league. So the main state championships here are São Paulo's, Rio, Rio Grande do Sul, down south in Brazil, and Minas Gerais. So the main 4 states, the main teams. So they worth a lot of money, and there's also these small state championships, and with more sponsored by national gambling brands,
Yeah. And Marcel, do you think, you and George both mentioned that there's a lot of these partnerships that go in are unactivated simply because of the volume of them. Do you think regulatory framework, regulation of sports betting could be the key to change that tide, to turn that tide, and we could start seeing some of these partnerships maximized off the back of proper regulation?
The regulation will allow also gambling companies to make online. Here in Brazil, they can buy Google or Meta ads, or the regulation will allow them to work more online and not depending on just the clubs. Also, there's going to be a consolidation of brands because not many of those small brands are going to last the regulation scenario. And once it happens, probably the offering to the clubs are going to go a little bit down. And so if you want to get a good sponsor, you have also to deliver a good property to the sponsor, you know. So you probably need to work more with ambassadors, more with your online social medias. For instance, clubs in Brazil have huge numbers in online social medias, and you can see that sponsors are basically T-shirt or jersey sponsors. They don't really activate this online, so which they could do better, you know. So in a lot of senses, I think the regulation will push the market to be more professional or treat this sponsorship more. It won't be that easy to get, so you have to treat it better, you know.
And George, is that an appetite, that appetite for more professionalism and greater activations? Is that something you've seen and you think could come off the back of regulation as well?
Yeah, look, I think you'd hope it would exist anyway. But like I said already, when you've got that constant ability to churn, and if you've got that queue of brands looking to partner with clubs, and not only that, but the asking price and the market rate of the sponsorship valuations goes up every summer, you're almost better off being in market every year. So that longevity of partnership at the moment is less worthwhile for teams than it is to churn every year and just try and get more money, new partner, more money. I think regulation will change that because, as I said earlier on, I think we'll see some consolidation. We'll see some of the operators who are sponsoring at the moment come out of the market completely. And when there's less demand, as we know, basic economics, when there's less demand for something, then the price should drop. And once it starts to drop, then it'll be about properly activating. That said, Marcel, I'm sure will tell you the same. Like, there are clubs working hard to activate these partnerships, just not many of them. I've seen some great presentations that have been produced about case studies of how these partnerships are being delivered. But when you're talking about the sheer proliferation of deals that have been done, it's in the minority.
Totally agree. There are some professionals that we can generalize and say that's on not all the market, but I mean, in a lot of senses, yes, they should get more professional with this sponsorship,
And Fernando, I guess to close us on that point, what impact do you think regulation will have on it feels like from the outside looking in a little bit of a wild west right now in terms of sponsorships. What impact do you think regulation of sports betting will have on that market?
Well, I definitely think that right now there's a lot of companies going on, working in the Brazilian market. So we still need to see what type of regulation the Brazilian government finally enforces and what type of rules companies will have to comply with. So it will depend on whether the licenses are too expensive or there are too many requirements that they can't comply with. So I think probably the amount of operators is going to reduce a bit. At least that's what I think might happen. But like I said, we still have to wait and see what type of regulation we are going to have, and I think it's going to be a while before we actually get more certainty about what license fees there are going to be and all that type of requirements for companies, and of course the type of requirements that will impact how much or how many operators are going to still be there once regulation gets enforced.
You mentioned it at the top of the show, and I think it's vital. You can't have this discussion without talking about the match fixing scandal that has really rocked domestic football in Brazil. I guess where does that fit in this discussion? Obviously, it's not a great look. Domestic sides being plastered with betting operators and this scandal being sort of the elephant in the room. Where does that fit in this discussion? And is regulation going to place an eye on this and bear this in mind as it comes into force?
Well, I think it definitely regulation needs to put an eye on this type of stuff, like sports integrity. There's actually organizations for this that operators have created to work towards sports integrity guidelines and everything. So prior to regulation, they are already willing to work with the government and the authorities to allow sports integrity to be easier to happen. But the match fixing scandal that's rocking Brazil right now, it's definitely bad publicity for the industry. Like if you are a Brazilian, a regular person in Brazil, you're looking into, okay, so the government is trying to regulate sports betting, and at the same time, there's this massive scandal with players getting fired because they were involved in side bets and prop bets. They were forcing penalties, forcing corner kicks to get some money out of it. And you're thinking, okay, oh, this industry is dirty. So it definitely, the government definitely needs to look into it, even if the match fixing scandal hadn't happened, they still need to look into it. But since it has already happened, they need to look into it. They need to enforce or lay out proper guidelines for sports integrity for operators to follow. Operators, of course, are definitely willing to collaborate with that, I think. And once you get that done, once you get those guidelines in, you can get a healthy industry going on, right? And try to prevent these match fixing scandals. But like I mentioned before, there's some rumors that the government might want to wait out at least for a while until that commission, that special group it ends with the investigation or completes the investigation on the investigation that's looking into the match fixing scandal. So I think besides having to look into the match fixing possibilities and the sports integrity rules, I think that might cause the regulation to take a little longer than we expected.
Marcel, anything to add on that? How significant is this task force? And yeah, this discussion around integrity is vital in Brazil at the moment.
Yeah, sure. Well, as Fernando mentioned, the government was kind of discussing, all the proposal was based on regulation and on more bureaucratic features. No, the license fee, the taxing of gross gaming revenue, the taxing of the players that win the gamble. Everything, the original proposal is focused to that. Once that was going to be approved, there is still going to be created a special secretary to analyze all these concerns with gambling. So they are going to be funded by these taxes, and they have a commission of all the operators and the police and the Congress to kind of prevent and create a safe environment for gambling. But the scandal happened before. So right now, there's all these congressional hearings, and this is a part only for being good for the business. It's also a political show. So these congressional hearings takes a lot of time because everybody's going there. And since you're dealing with football that deals with the huge passion from Brazilian fans, everybody wants to talk. So this is going to delay the regulation. There's no...
Yeah, let me add that it has actually been delayed this very week. Like, it has been further delayed. These hearings have been delayed until August because there's a recess in Congress next July 18th up to the August 1st, and you can read all about it in svcnoticias.com and svc.noticias.com/br, like Brazil. But yeah, the government has actually prioritized right now the economic agenda, so they have pushed this hearing. So that's definitely bad news for regulation.
I think it's worth saying though, guys, that these challenges aren't isolated just to Brazil. Obviously, we've seen some challenges with the NFL in the North American market as well, and that's a relatively young gambling market. So these are things that will naturally need to be worked through. You only learn you learn from mistakes, essentially. But without a doubt, and I don't think it's just Brazil that we should focus on with these sorts of topics. I think these challenges face South America as a continent with the gambling industry, but also all markets that are relatively new and growing. And
George,
up and
will
coming.
this type of story sort of, I guess, start dominating the headlines in Brazil? Will it increase nervousness for operators looking to partner with clubs, or clubs looking to partner with operators? Will it create a different dynamic to that conversation, or do they just increase safeguards?
No, I don't think it affects the appetite for sponsorship between brands and rights holders at all. I think what it does do is it adds credence and fuel to the discussions that we mentioned the bill at one of the bills at the start of the show around trying to ban advertising in Brazil. It certainly adds validity to those arguments, which the sports teams and the general public won't want. Sports fans won't want, because of the amount of investment that's going into sports in Brazil right now. But yeah, I don't think it will diminish the appetite for brands to take hold of rights, not just in football, by the way. It's worth saying that there's a lot of sports outside of football that have benefited massively from the influx of sponsorship from the gambling industry, helping to support the growth of sports in Brazil. And Marcel, I'm sure, can touch a little bit more on that.
The competition for sponsoring football in Brazil is too big, so many other sports are growing with betting sponsorships. I mean, like volleyball, growing up, the fighting, the UFC and boxers and Olympic athletes, they're all getting private sponsors for betting. They're doing great activation for the brands. And also, there's gambling also going into entertainment as well in Brazil a lot. Like concerts and, for example, Rock in Rio, or they're sponsoring this kind of events because the lack of space in football. The also kind of rodeos or how to say, there's the São João party. It's a traditional party in Brazil. It's northeast Brazil. So national brands are playing there a lot right now.
Yeah, George, you seamlessly moved on to my final question there, and that was about other sports. And Marcel, you mentioned it. I'm a passionate martial arts fan, and I know the passion Brazilians have for martial arts. Jose Aldo, Charles Oliveira, lauded in the country of Brazil, and all they have betting partnerships. So I guess, to close it, the saturation of football other sports will benefit from that, right?
No, but but definitely, I think it's already happening. The saturation from the football's leading brands to all the sports. Fighting, obviously, because of our fighters have huge presence here in social network, like celebrities here in Brazil. This is a very obvious sport. Also, basketball and volleyball. There's probably volleyball is the second largest main sport league in Brazil. So it's going. Not only in football. The difficult things, again, with the scandal, as you mentioned, the fixing scandals, is once it goes to these small events, so they're going to have to be extra careful, because they can do it on these mafias can do it on the main league. On small events, the operator is going to have extra careful,
Yeah, definitely. And I could talk to you guys all day about this. We could have spoken just about our favorite Brazilian footballers for hours, I'm sure, but a really interesting discussion. And Marcel, Fernando, George, thanks ever so much. But Marcel, special thanks for being on today's episode. And hopefully get you back on when we get a bit of clarity on the regulatory framework and what that means for sponsorship of Brazilian football and Brazilian sports, as we mentioned, because not just are you passionate football fans, but you're passionate about sports. So a really interesting market and really interesting to see how it develops. thanks ever so much for your time this afternoon.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of iGaming Daily, brought to you in conjunction with SBC Summit Barcelona, being held at the Fira Barcelona Montjuic on the 19th to the 21st of September. If you want to find out more about some of the subjects raised today, feel free to explore any of the sites in the SBC News Network or check out the latest edition of the SBC Leaders magazine. Happy reading.